RPGers, game masters, and such. Last thing I'm going to talk about here about the mechanics of the game itself is spells, how to learn them, how to cast them, what the spell list looks like. And honestly, I've gone back through this. This is like the fourth or fifth time trying to record it, and I keep finding little errors in what I was doing because it is a little confusing. All right, you play D&D, you have a spellcaster, they cast a spell. They learn it. They have to roll on a percentage whether or not they learn something. And after that, they can cast the spell. They make the list up ahead of time they're going to use for that day. It's pretty straightforward. This is a little different, okay? In fact, everybody gets to cast spells. It depends on whether or not you can pass a skill check to do it. Has a lot to do with whether or not you can learn it. And the second thing is whether or not you can cast it. So it takes two different separate skill checks to be a good spellcaster, right? Start off with, it is going to use the skill check system, which is the D6 system, okay? So first off, it's going to be using this section of the table based on your attribute score, okay? But you get a bonus if you have certain skills, like occultist. You should be able to cast a little better. You get a +1 on your roll, all right? These penalties are already taken into account in the actual spells, and I'll show you what I mean in a second, all right? Let's take one of the harder spells. This is like commune. It's a 5th level spell. To learn the spell, you get a -3 on your rolls to learn it. And learning spells use intelligence as your modifier. Okay, I'll give an examples of this coming up after I break it all down. They have longer times than most spells for actually casting, and then basically they give you a second thing as a spell check. This is whether or not you can actually cast it. One is learning. This is spell learning. It's intelligence. Casting it could either be wisdom, intelligence, or charisma. Okay? And here's the thing. If you screw the casting up, here, bad stuff can happen, right? That's what makes this really neat, right? So you either could do one or two things. You can increase your insanity, or bad things happen to you, like some things chase you or target you. So these things can happen based on casting. Like I said, anybody can do it, okay? So this is what's going to make this a little challenging, right? So let's take a look at this. It's based on a D6 system. So the first one, you have to pass the check to learn the spell. You're going to use your intelligence and the modifier inside the spell, like I showed that one that was a -3, or you can actually use your mythos points if possible. But in the end, if you cast, you should be able to gain a mythos points based on your understanding of a new part of this basically mythology, right? If you fail the check, you still gain a mythos point, but you can gain 1 insanity point because you didn't exactly learn the spell, you just delved into something that really confused your brain. Okay, essentially is what it is, right? To actually cast the spell, you can use your appropriate modifier, okay? In this case, it'd be intelligence, wisdom, or charisma, plus your mythos modifier. And to just talk about that briefly, as you go through the game, these points increase with additional casting, or you might run into things, or you can find artifacts that would increase this entire thing. And so they're going to give you bonuses for doing two things: learning spells, casting spells, and possibly when it comes to insanity checks. Okay, so these are things to take into consideration, right? So spell checks is saving throws versus insanity. Okay, so that's something to take into consideration. Right? And then if you're an occultist, this is going to help you when it comes to actually casting all these spells. Not everyone's going to be one. And then you can have situational things based on the game master. That's why I put that in there, but it's a D6 roll. Once again, this is not going to apply, but more it's this table, and then most of this is taken into what's mentioned in the actual spell, right? Let me get through a couple of examples. It'll make more sense. Here we go. I have an antiquarian here, right? Her intelligence is 15. So 15 means 4, 5, or 6 they can learn a spell, okay? But has a skill of occult, so it's a +1. So now it's 3, 4, 5, 6. And check this out. Your occupation means you get to roll 2d6 and take the higher. So there's 2 chances of doing this. Instead of just 1d6, you roll 2d6. So essentially, you just roll a 4d6 to actually pass the spell, but +1 for the occult, -1 because it says learning spells -1 for 2d6. So now that's basically going to cancel these two things out. So all they have to do is roll a 4 or higher on it with 2d6, two six-sided dice. They're gonna just one of them has to be a 4, and then you're gonna learn the spell. When it comes to actually casting it, now look at this. The intelligence says -2 on casting, so character intelligence once again is still at 15. They got the occult thing. They're going to roll 2d6, take the higher. But you must roll 4 through 6. But look, when you add it up, +1 for the skill occult, -2 for the spell check, 2d6. So now they have to roll a 5 because you have to subtract 1 from it to make it a 4, 5, 6 to go. So if you rolled a 4, 4 minus 1 is a 3, they would not be able to cast the spell. And they would suffer the consequences. Okay? Here's another example. Let's say you have a combatant. Intelligence is 10. Doesn't have a skill, doesn't have occupation, must roll a 5 through 6. So look, they're just kind of a normal guy. So a 33% chance of doing this, but they get a -1 to learn the spell based on this right here. So they must roll a 6. -1 is a 5 to learn the spell. However, they're in a bad situation when it comes to casting. Because if you remember, it's a -2 to cast it. So it's, again, all the stats are the same. Intelligence is 10, no skill, no occupation. Must roll a 5 through 6, but a -2 to the roll. So even if they roll a 6, -2 is a 4, they do not cast the spell. So this is where the more intelligent characters, or the ones with the higher charisma or the higher wisdom, are going to be able to do some of this. Here's another example. This same antiquarian, she's going to cast a different spell. It's going to be a charm person, okay? Intelligence is 15, skill occult, you've already heard all this, right? So basically, to learn the spell, it's a +0, so they just have to roll a 3 to learn this spell. So they have 3, 4, 5, 6. They have a 66% chance of actually to learn the spell. And when it comes to casting, let's say her charisma is 8. Doesn't look it, but let's pretend, right? She still has skill occult, which is +1. Occupation occultist, 2d6, take the higher. Must roll a 5 or a 6 because she's now right here on average as far as attractiveness, or how would you say, will, or whatever you want to say. +1 for skill occult. 0 for this 2d6. So all she has to do is roll a 4 because it's a 5 or a 6, but she does get a +1. So 4 + 1 is a 5, and she's able to cast a spell. My last example is I'm going to take someone that is, let's say, an opportunist. Her intelligence is 10, and she wants to cast that same charm person spell. So it's a 0 to learn it, but she has to roll a 5 or a 6, so she just must roll a 5 or above to learn the spell. Okay, it starts to make more sense as you look at examples, right? But her charisma is fairly high. She got charisma of 15, doesn't have a skill, doesn't have occupation, must roll a feat success of 4 through 6 with the 0 spell check. So she has a 50% chance of casting the spell. So if she rolls a 5 or 6, she learned it. And she rolls a 4, 5, or 6, she can actually cast the spell. So hopefully this illuminates a little bit about spell casting. Like I said, it's an interesting way of doing it because you could fail at it, and there's some backwash to this thing. Obviously, you can gain an insanity point and something goes wrong, but this is what makes it fun because it's not just so cookie cutter. Okay, wow, it failed. No big deal. This is, it failed, and there's a bad effect to it because you're messing with dark magic here. With that, hopefully this illustrates a little bit on how the game is played. In my next video, I'm actually going to pick apart a scenario I kind of put together. I mulled over for several days to put something together to do for my group, and they seem to really like it. With that, I hope you have a good evening.